Okay.
Yeah. Recording in progress must mean that as attractive as the food is, we at least have one other thing on the agenda. So Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Last time I neglected to do something which is the tradition to have everybody give their name at the beginning.
We can, yeah.
I think it's a good idea, and I promise I will remember those I already knew. No, but I want to hear it once, and we should hear each other. Somebody once said, an anonymous study group, Torah study, is a contradiction of Jewish faith. So, why don't we start here?
I'm Nancy Mary Milana. Susan. Terry. Ellen.
Jared.
Rochelle.
Lynn. Russell. Henry.
Barbara. Judy.
Joel.
Carolyn.
Ricky.
Okay,
Steve.
Steve. All right, good.
Who are you? I'm sorry.
And from the Zoom, Don,
Yeah.
somebody else.
Eileen.
Randy.
And those who choose to, okay. The next thing on the agenda is that the screen changes to the bracha over study. We'll add to that the motzi, which as our granddaughter picked up once along the way, since the motzi sometimes comes after some of the eating, that it was in memory of the food that. But we'll put together in the bracha for study, which is on the screen. Baruch.
Eloheinu, melech haolam,
Asher Kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah.
Torah.
And we all say amen.
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 The motzi, which we don't need on the screen. Someone once posted on the rabbinic board that some rabbi said we say the Shechayanu too much. And I noted that my doctor says I say the motzi too often. Just join with me, Baruch.
Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. If we can have the first text slide. Yeah, let me set the stage. This week is the first book, the second book, the first portion of Shemot of Exodus. The portion is called Shemot, the names as well. And the stage is this. The Israelites have gone to Egypt, 70 strong under Jacob and Joseph. They are now 600,000 or many hundreds, but they have grown, they've flourished in Egypt, they've been welcomed, they have lived on Joseph's fame and the fact that he was a hero among the Egyptians. But when we come to the book of Exodus, we all know the story. We know that they're going to be enslaved. Suddenly we have an influx. Good. So I'm indebted to Rabbi Michael Danziger up the road for this insight as we approach Exodus. For us, it's easy. We know what the next steps are going to be. We know the story. When they leave Canaan to go as a family to Egypt, Jacob and Joseph are with them. The last things that happen in Genesis are that Jacob and Joseph die. And we know that they're about to come into 400 years of slavery. But Rabbi Michael Danziger pointed out that at the end of each book of the Torah, when we finish reading, the tradition is to say Chazak, Chazak, V'nichazek. The reason I hesitated is a student rabbi once said, Chazak, Chazak, V'nitchametz. I said to him, What you just said is be strong, and make yourselves into vinegar. Recognize the as hummus. He has gone on to find a wonderful rabbi nearing retirement at this point. Anyway, we say chazak, chazak, be strong, and strengthen each other. And Michael pointed out that this is a case of going from loss to hope. Even before we go to the story of slavery, we in fact have already expressed hope, and that hope will be fulfilled in the next chapters of Exodus. But first, we have a little foreshadowing, and that's why I have this on the board. Would someone like to read this? This is from Genesis 15. This is very early in God's relationship with Abram. He's not even Abraham. Who would like to read that?
I'll read it. And he said to Abram, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. And also the nation that they will serve, I will judge, and afterwards they will go forth with great possessions.
Isn't that remarkable?
Wow.
400, not just you're gonna be slaves, but they're gonna be slaves for 400 years. And not only that, but they're gonna go out with great possessions. And in our portion, Moses will tell the people, God will tell Moses to tell the people, borrow all the gold and silver and the pots and pans from your Egyptian neighbors, so you're prepared with a whole lot of stuff, with many U-Hauls, when we leave Egypt on our way to the promised land. This is a wonderful example of why, no matter what you're feeling about biblical inerrancy, biblical literalism, and so forth, it is so very clear that this is written in hindsight of what did happen to connect Abraham with what happened in Egypt. We can go to the next slide.
At that time, were all the Jews in the world in Egypt?
I guess so, yeah. You mean at that time as in the slavery?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Abram was the only Hebrew around in the Genesis time. So here we are in Exodus 2:11, and let me frame this now as my iPad went off. These are the overarching questions for today, for me. Why is there slavery at all? Why any kind of slavery? Why 400 years until God hears the groaning and the cries of the children of Israel? Is it okay to uproot these other people to give your people their land? Certainly not a very timely question. What did Israel do to merit redemption? What was there about them that gave them merited redemption? So the first question, why enslavement at all? And why would God allow 400 years of slavery? I would like for you all to take the responsibility right now. Anybody who wants to volunteer, and as many as possible, for short speeches. You're the defense attorneys for God. God is asked as a witness or defendant, why did you let these people suffer in slavery at all? What had they done to merit slavery? Why 400 years? And what was the big deal about suddenly saying, I hear the groaning and I hear the cries? What's new about that? So with that, Russell?
I have to give you the defense some people give when they talk about the Holocaust. And they say God didn't do that, people did.
So the enslavement is not, where is God at this point?
That is a good question.
That's why I asked him. If God is on the stand, the defense stand, but in this case, the witness stand, the question to God still, why did you let people do it?
I don't think it's a matter.
Yeah.
He doesn't interfere in human choice, in human free choice. And I think he cries with us.
I agree with you. It's very hard, however, to make that case when we are coming up shortly later with 10 plagues
Right.
in which God doesn't just interfere, but turns the world upside down 10 times, including the death of the firstborn.
Yeah, I think you have to, in answer to your question, you have to consider, well, what is it that you think God is, or how does God operate? Is God involved with his creation, or did he create and set the rules for the game and then let it play out? I mean, is there a direct, or is he just an observer?
So I think that's a yes and no answer, because we do have instances like this where he stands back. But then we have all of these instances in our writings where it's almost as if God says, okay, I can't take this anymore. I'm done. I'm interfering.
Yeah,
Yes and
it
no.
means, right.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just like God tested Abraham with the money of Isaac, maybe he's testing the people to see if their strength was still, there's one God.
Just,
But
we
I
often.
think it was quite curious, though, that God only heard the cries and moaning, which implies that in the 400 years, the Israelites did not go directly to God to ask for help. They were groaning, but they knew of God from the past. But did they ever in the 400 years ask him to intervene?
May I say and add something? Rabbi Michael Danziger's father taught us years ago that what he heard was that infants drowning in the Nile, the children of Israel, and that he said, you can enslave my people, but you're not going to get away with that.
That's a correct, absolutely. There, let me go back to Nancy's, which was
God was testing the people.
testing. Testing is always a very good out for God.
But is it testing or educating?
Testing or educating. There was a woman.
He's preparing the ground.
There was a mother who wrote a note to the teacher of her little boy. She said this, she said, if little Kevin, anybody here named Kevin? If little Kevin misbehaves, just spank the kid next to him. He'll be so traumatized by it, you'll never have any more problems. And that's the problem with the testing and the lessons. And so I'm Almighty God, and can I find a better way to teach a lesson or test than have 400 years of slaves? Because most of those people are gonna live as slaves and die as slaves.
Born as slaves.
And whatever it
Nothing
is
else.
they learned, it probably wasn't faith in God.
Right.
But I understand your point. Now, Dr. Levy on the Zoom, it's wonderful to be correctly quoted. I mean, I had a professor who once said, Mr. So-and-so, you will never quote me or Aristotle again. Do you understand that? But it is true. When we get to the question of why suddenly does God hear the crying? Yeah, maybe it's the Israelites never groaned and cried, but I suspect they did. But the big change that's taken place is the drowning. The Pharaoh says these people are becoming too great and too mighty for us. And if we have a battle, they will become a fifth column within our land and rise up against us. Come, let us deal wisely with them. And has the midwives drown the first, the boy baby.
The boys.
The midwives don't do it. They're considered heroes. They don't do it. They say, well, the Israelite women deliver so fast, we don't even get there yet. But some of the babies are drowned. Moses is not, as we know. And one of the answers to why does God hear the crying is it's literally not Bnei Yisrael, the Israelites, but Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. So let me add one to that. Who said that? It is Dr. Levy. story, and I cannot find it, but I know I didn't make it up. That when they have the increase in or they have the same quota of bricks, but now they have to get their own straw. These incidentally are adobe. That's the only place I know you have straw and bricks and clay is adobe or mud. When they increase the time, the effort it takes to make a brick, there is a story somewhere of a woman who was pregnant, and she delivers her baby, and she's in the mud pit. And the baby comes, and because of the taskmasters pushing them on, the baby ends up walled alive in one of the adobe bricks. And it's the cries of that child that God hears. And says, now I have to do something. But as you can tell from what has been said here, the issue when you ask the question, why the slavery, it's hard to answer.
What about it certainly kept us in one place to multiply. You know, would we have dispersed if we weren't forced to stay there?
Yeah, of course, dispersed in the sense of been disappeared
Geographically
and disappeared as an ethnic group, as a faith family. Yeah, that's very possible. It's a tough way to do it. It's got to have been easier. And if you take God out of the equation, then the question of why they were enslaved takes us to all kinds of issues of what it is to be the stranger, what it is to be the different, what it is to be the potential target, what it is to be the hero one day, and then a few days later to be a target. We saw that this fall. We saw how Israel became the object of enormous sympathy and the horror of what had been done to them for a few days.
Right.
And then many of the eternal themes began to bubble up. And I didn't do this for that reason. But it's just sort of there.
Rabbi, may I ask a question? It's Suzanne on Zoom. Is there any archaeological evidence of the 400 years of slavery in Egypt? I've heard that there isn't.
I don't think there is, certainly not 400 years. There was a people, they say, called the Habiru, who were in Egypt, and there are records about them. It's probably a lot more likely that one group of a number that came together to become the children of Israel had this story, and this story became part of the story of all of them. How can I illustrate that? Oh, well, sort of, not really good, but sort of. The understanding is that there was one group that maybe worshipped a god called El, and another is called Shaddai, and another called Yahweh, and so on. And they eventually coalesced into the children of Israel. We have something not quite so good, but we all celebrate Thanksgiving. And many of us remember dressing up as pilgrims when we were children in elementary school, even though our ancestors were not part of the first Thanksgiving. Mine were eating herring in Lithuania. They were not eating turkey.
Right.
But it became part of the common story for the e pluribus unum that came together as America. That's not a good illustration because these are actually tribes. So I don't think there was any evidence of 400 years of a people.
I was able to add, Vivian Arundel is a professor at U of M Judaica Studies, and I asked her one. There is no written record of the Exodus in Egyptian. She said no, but she said, but the Egyptians didn't write about anything that didn't make them look good.
Good point.
Certainly one way to preserve, it's true of the Pharisees. If the Pharisees did not say very many things that are good about other than.
Carol's right. I mean, they've been victorious, put down the rebellion. It'll be hieroglyphics, built temple.
Yeah, that might be. I want to go to just 1 second, 2:23 to 24. Is that there? It's at the bottom. Now it came to pass. This is after Moses kills the taskmaster. We'll remember that. Everybody knows the story. Moses goes back to his people.
Yeah.
He sees the taskmaster beating a Hebrew. Moses rises up with his Hebrew identity, even though he's been raised as an Egyptian. You can tell, Charlton Heston. And he kills the taskmaster, and then he comes out a day later and he sees 2 Hebrews fighting, and he tells them, stop that, well, you don't hit your brother like that. And one of them said, you're gonna kill us like you killed the taskmaster. And he says, now it's known. So just keep that in mind.
Exit
Just keep that in mind.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's still, it's hanging there. Would somebody read 23 and 24? Not that you get a very long part, but it's very juicy.
Now it came to pass in those many days that the king of Egypt died. And the children of Israel sighed from the labor, and they cried out, and their cry ascended to God from the labor. God heard their cry, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. How about that cataract surgery?
Very good. The one thing that adds that I wanted to, and thank you, Wendy. And after I had cataract, I could no longer read print without glasses. I was okay distance.
That's why I could read it.
Let me warn you. That continues to diminish until you're.
Don't tell me.
Anyway, not to trouble you.
Alright.
But there's an extra line here in 24. That's the only reason I had it read. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with
As
Jacob.
if he forgot.
It was 400 years.
As
Yeah.
As if you could ever. He's the one that made the darn cut.
And the interesting thing about that is that if you get out of sort of classical theology, very rigorous kind of stuff, and you think about God the way our ancestors very often thought about God, they often said things like, don't forget us.
Yeah, right.
Don't forget us. God didn't forget us.
Mhm.
There are all kinds of, in the positive, God remembered us,
Mhm.
and in the negative, where were you?
Mhm.
Why did you abandon us / forget us?
Mhm.
So this becomes a really very special line that's worth looking at. God remembers his covenant. You can imagine him saying, oh my me.
Oh, my me.
Maybe God is like us. He's got the evil and the good on either shoulder.
Yeah, or at least whatever God's perfection is, it isn't like Greek perfection. Greek perfection is when it's perfect, anything that's changed must be imperfect. It's like it's outside this little dot.
Mhm.
And it's not in that dot, it's imperfect. In our case, God gets angry.
Yeah.
God is talked out of his anger.
Right.
And in this case, something reminds him. And we talked about what reminded him, the cries of the children.
Mhm.
Oh, there's some other things. Oh, but somebody had a hand.
Yeah, I was just-
Yeah,
Okay,
you,
and your first name is
Helen,
Ellen.
you said something about the imperfections. Well, we were made in his image. And my idea of our imperfections is that we are given them as a gift to try and make us better and to try and make others better. Like, for instance, I can get very angry, suddenly explode because I have PTSD. People who know that go, okay, I have to understand her. I have to understand why it happened. I have to be patient. It makes them better too.
Heard
It's
somebody,
just an example.
thank you, I heard somebody this week talking at length about having, oh, well, I know who it was. It was Rabbi Levy shared last night in his sermon, that he was diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
And that he had to work through that. And I think, yeah, there's an element that makes us better dealing with other people whose shortcomings we come to appreciate, to understand or appreciate. In this case,
You know, by verse 24, can't God multitask? I don't know. Was he busy on Mars? You know, he can't. I thought God was all.
All the time,
Everybody says he does, he heard their.
yeah, he
No,
is
in
right.
God- That is multitasking,
In
right?
God's time, 400 years is a blip.
Well,
Right?
That's true. I want to suggest the question of why does he hear them then? And we talked about the children. There may be other reasons. Why did the civil rights movement come up in the 50s?
After the war,
After the war? What did it, expand that, if you will, Ellen?
well, so much injustice in that war, so much cruelty, so much horrific things. And I can imagine that the minorities in this country who had been enslaved had a parallel thought about all this and also wanted an end, even though it had already ended officially, it was not ended in their heart.
It wasn't actually ended.
No,
And it still isn't.
Yeah, slavery was ended, but Jim Crow was well
Yes.
underway.
But you also
Rabbi-
have to consider that during the war, everybody was brought together. Jew, Gentile, Black, Hispanic, everybody was brought together and learned to live and depend upon each other.
That might
So
be-
there was a different, you changed perspective.
Right, and then they
Also,
come back.
Joel, I
come
think
back
that-
together.
I think that might be less true of Americans.
Yeah,
than
that's,
of the Jewish boy from Brooklyn and the farm boy from Kansas. And the Black American, to continue that
They
theme.
came back, yeah, they weren't gonna come back to the way things were, not after they experienced the world.
So, yeah, well, and they went out and fought together, they
Right.
died together, they
Right,
come back now, and now they're discriminated against. They go
Exactly.
along
The
and-
two locuses that I see
And
in
things go
that,
right back to where they were, right?
the thing I see most,
I
the
actually
thing
think that
I,
this, that the civil rights movement, the germs of it predated World War II.
well, they did.
I know that,
well, yeah,
Eleanor Roosevelt, for one, was one of the people who was very much in favor of that sort of thing. But during the war, we had to focus on one specific thing. And everything else had to go under till that war was over.
I think there wasn't a movement in the way there was starting in the 50s. And I have to think that one of the seeds of that is the story, and it's repeated many times, the same situation, where a Black American soldier had to sit in his own car and couldn't go into the dining room
Exactly.
in the railroad station, but the German prisoner of war could.
right.
And that, I think that underscore, there's some of the other seeds of what might be why God says enough is enough. So let me give you an example. One of the examples that the rabbis give is the Hebrews eventually got used to it. They eventually accepted their identity as slaves.
As slaves.
Imagine, now we go back to the civil rights movement. There were plenty of Black Americans who said, don't make waves.
Right.
Don't make waves. It's just gonna get worse. It got worse with Moses. Moses goes to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I'll show you what I can do. You want your people to go? Now they can find their own straw.
And the Hebrews said, don't make waves.
Don't make waves.
Don't make waves.
It's the life they were used to,
Same
and
now.
out there, they had no idea if it's better or worse.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons the Hebrews You can even feel that when they get out in the desert and they say to Moses, we ate so well, we had all these
Right.
delicacies. We used to be in
Used to have meat.
Restaurant Iris every night. Or whatever was the current place in Goshen.
I'm just wondering if God didn't have to go on human time. You know, 400 years to God is, who is eternal, is not very long.
Well,
And I think one of the things that might have happened was that God suddenly realized that this was a very long time for humans,
it's been going on, man.
right?
Boy, talk about oblivious.
400 years.
But-
Oblivious 400 years.
Boy,
But-
oh boy.
Perhaps,
You know, that only reminds me, when we say 400 years, of a old friend and classmate of mine who shall, for reasons that we appeared go nameless, who was telling me many years ago that when he left his first pulpit where he was an assistant, one of the teenagers put something in his jacket pocket after services and said, "This is for you when you're home." It was what was then called a joint.
Oh.
And he described, it was why he would never do this again. He said, I smoked it. He said, if one of our children had started crying upstairs, it would have taken me 4 hours. He said, that was my experience. And that was, by the way, my closest experience. But 400 is a long time for the parent to discover the kid is hurting. But yeah, you know, you could say that also there's something else. 40, 470, 77. Anytime you see those numbers in biblical literature, you know that what they mean is a long time.
Right.
but perhaps God was waiting the 400 years for the people to do something on their own. Because the example in the civil rights movement, the people began doing something, and then the Spirit of God helped them in that. But we don't have any evidence that in the 400 years the Jews did anything to rebel against their oppression.
That's Donald. That was Donald, right?
Yes.
That was a terrific point, because if you take out the question of did they do something special and reshape it very slightly, was there anything that they did that was meritorious?
Right.
The tradition is there were 4 things they did. There's one tradition that says there were 4 things they did. I'll give you 2 traditions. One, God has to tell them, and the other, they did on their own. The one they did on their own, they're praised for having faith. They didn't change their names. American Jews don't have that, you know, the wonderful stories of American Jews changing their names. Some, like my grandfather, who reputedly, his name was Israel Cohen. Cohen for Kentucky, Cohen was just a little too Jewish. Now he became Israel Rosenberg.
My son was lost on
But I'm not sure if that's true. But he certainly was Rosenberg by the time.
Oh, that's hysterical.
First arrived in Egypt, it was to quote unquote dwell, because there was a famine in our homeland. I think the intent was never to stay there. The intent was probably to, well, we'll wait this out and then we'll return to our homes. But they became complacent.
That's very possible, that they no longer look to the promise of the promised land.
Right.
They became complacent and they
But
would stay.
Pharaoh, when Joseph brought his family down, Pharaoh made his family wealthy and made them part of his
Right.
his what am I thinking, cabinet. You know, he made them in charge over his flocks. I mean, they treated him well. Why wouldn't they stay? I mean, and gave them.
But maybe that was
choice
never the
land.
intent. Maybe
Yeah.
that's why it took so long
Well,
for
they
God to say, all right. I'll get
maybe
them
that's
out."
part of it, that God says, I don't want them to become so complacent here, because this isn't where I want them. I
Right.
want them in my land, which is
Right.
their land, which we'll get to in terms of the giving of the land. So one is they didn't change their names. Great story. Man calls his mother and says, "Mama, I thought you were coming to visit me in my office." She said, "I did." He says, "So what happened?" She said, "I couldn't find you." This was Mrs. Rosenberg looking for her son, and she couldn't remember what his name was. So that's one, they didn't change their names. Two, they didn't change their language. Do we know this? No, the rabbis, 2,000 years later, 1,500 years later. The rabbis said they didn't change their names. So they didn't change their names, they didn't change their language. Three, and this is a very funny one, they didn't gossip. How do we know they didn't? We absolutely don't know, because I told you to keep something in mind. What was it that I told you to keep in mind? No, what a great teacher I am, you all know. What did I say? You know, we see this up here, keep it in mind. Had to do with the killing of the Egyptian. He kills an Egyptian taskmaster, the next day he goes out among the people.
The matter was known.
And the matter was known. So they don't gossip. The only evidence we have they don't gossip is that within a day, everybody knows he killed the taskmaster. This is before social media.
Right. And yet everybody knew.
This is before X became X.
I
Anyway,
struggle with this, this idea of, 400 years of not doing anything except for that and the word meritorious, because I see a cycle in the Hebrew, in Jewish history. In terms of behavior, there are enormous stretches where they are like, Johnny be good. And then suddenly, well, we have to fight. And it's even nowadays in Israel, everybody is so good. They get attacked, fine. And they go in overdrive.
yeah.
A necessary overdrive, my personal opinion, you can, no. But what is Johnny be good? Is that not meritorious? To me, that is meritorious. That is like, you're so well behaved, you do what you're told. That's how we were raised. That's what they try to do.
Let me add one dimension to it. It's not original to me. It was Yitz Greenberg. Irving Greenberg is a rabbi, he's an Orthodox rabbi. He is the Reform and Conservatives' favorite Orthodox rabbi, certainly from the 90s, because Yitz Greenberg had been a typical Orthodox rabbi of his time, and he was preaching a kind of Orthodox triumphalism. You know, we're better. We have it right, that sort of thing. And somebody shouted out at one of his speeches and said, "And would you separate sexes in the crematorium or the gas chamber?" And it so struck him, and he developed an entire concept and organization about bringing different denominations of American Jews together. But Yitz Greenberg's philosophical, theological, behavioral point has been, it was easy to be Johnny be good when we had no power. And what has happened now, particularly with the state of Israel, not this month or this week or this year, what happened was we now confronted the question which we rarely had to confront over the centuries. What do you do when you have power? And you pointed to that sort of thing. The Maccabees, we honor the Maccabees because they did, and you said it very well, what had to be done. In the book, like Dreamers by Yossi Klein Halevi, it's about the paratroopers. He follows only 6 of them who were among the group that took the Western Wall in 1967. Their paths in life go all kinds of directions. But one of the things he deals with, if I'm correct, it's Halevi, is the taking of the city of Lod, which is where the airport is, Ben Gurion. And the taking of the city of Lod, there was a driving out of the Palestinians who lived there.
That's true.
And he says, I think it's he, or anyway, he says, it was terrible, and yet if we didn't do it, we'd never have a state. And that's the kind of thing here. So I'm getting back. What did they do? They didn't gossip. They didn't change their names. They didn't do anything for anybody necessarily. They didn't change their language. And the other was they didn't change their sexual practices, because the Egyptians are always seen, as are the Canaanites, as having pagan sexual practices. That's
Rabbi,
one.
excuse me, I wondered what you would comment on the fact that Joseph gave his children, he's Egyptian, he married Egyptian, gave his children Hebrew names.
Yeah,
I don't
right.
if you live in Goshen, everybody has Hebrew names, but Joseph gives his children almost Hebrew names.
So I think you're right, but if one were to play devil's advocate, the question would be, were Ephraim and Manasseh the Hebrew names until he gave them?
But Nelson Mandela made that comment, weakness was nothing. When he had power, that was the danger.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's right with Yitzhak Greenberg, although
These were Joseph's children,
yeah.
and we know that when the Israelites left Egypt, the half tribes of those two were with him. So were Joseph's children become slaves?
Probably. I mean, if carrying the theme out, they would have been enslaved, because we don't know of anybody who wasn't a slave
Right.
except Moses, and that
Well,
was.
do we know what generation it really started in? The slavery, in other words, did it really start with Joseph and then did it come later?
No,
There's
it
a
comes
verse
later.
the verse that says, and Pharaoh arose who did
Right.
not know Joseph.
Right, who did not know
Right,
Joseph.
this is, and some say there was a different dynasty.
Oh.
A dynasty arose for whom Joseph's dynasty, that is the one he was identified with, was a bitter enemy. We saw that, we see that all the time when there's a revolution in a country. And if you've been on the wrong side of the revolution with the prior government, you better find a way out fast. Now, the other question of what did they do to merit being saved is they hadn't done anything. But if you're gonna be redeemed by God with 10 miracle plagues and so forth, it behooves you to do something. It really did. Something is better than nothing.
Okay.
So what do they have to do? You know the story.
Are you talking about putting the blood on the door?
Exactly.
That's it, they had to put the blood on the door.
They had to put, they were given a mitzvah that they could do. We use the word mitzvah often interchangeably with good deed, but of course a mitzvah is something you're commanded.
That's right.
So God says to Moses, tell them to go get a lamb, slaughter the lamb, sprinkle the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of your house, so that what happens?
The angel of death will pass.
The angel of death passes over, giving us the name Passover.
Now, Teddy,
Pardon?
that moment, and also, they consume the.
Oh, it consumes the meat. Yeah, that's the Paschal lamb is eaten. Now,
Parades, that was their God.
what's that?
That was their God that they slaughtered to put the blood.
That's part of it, yes. One of the three meanings, so thank you, that's very good, that one of the meanings of this is you're killing the Egyptian god, which means you're killing, it's a little bit of a sign you haven't adopted the Egyptian god, because the lamb, a sheep is one of the Egyptian gods.
Oh, okay.
Whoa, yeah.
But also, there is a tradition, in Yiddish, it is Mefregni Akasha Pamaisa. Now, I know all of you understand Yiddish. So you don't ask a question about a fairy tale.
Interesting.
The way it was illustrated to me by my very rationalist professor of philosophy, he said, when someone tells you the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, one doesn't say, wait a minute, bears don't sleep in bed.
Right.
That's a
Right.
kasha. Okay, so I'm willing to ask a kasha pamaisa, and my kasha pamaisa goes like this. You mean to say that the angel of death doesn't know who's who? Without the blood?
Without the blood?
And that tells us that it doesn't have intrinsic value. It's simply something that the Israelites are given to do.
To do, yeah.
You know, take out the garbage and you'll get a quarter a week or $7. It's not that no one else can take out the garbage, but if you take out the garbage, you earn your allowance. That's probably irreverent, but it's important to see. And the other, which is also blood, what other blood is involved in a very, very significant mitzvah?
Circumcision?
Circumcision.
Circumcision.
And so there is a tradition. God said to do the lamb, and they preserved circumcision and the blood in both of those cases. That's what ties them together, is enough to cause redemption.
Okay.
But a lot of the slaves weren't circumcised when they left Egypt because they had to circumcise themselves in the wilderness.
Remember, I
But
guess so.
the Israelites finally did something meritorious, so when they followed Moses, who was telling them, change everything in your life, give everything up. So they followed that. Moses was giving them the word of God, and they took the risk to do that, which is bravery, which I think is meritorious.
Not all of them.
That's the idea of following somebody who tells you to. Yeah, and that's sort of part of Jewish history. Abram does that. Go to the land that I will send you. Yes, that is very significant. And I'm thinking back to a meeting that took place at St. Louis, and I haven't forgotten your point about the circumcision in the wilderness. Because maybe they had given up circumcision in Egypt, and God said, do the blood on the coast and the blood of circumcision. There was a meeting at St. Louis Catholic Church some time after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. It was one of the many meetings of bring people together, bring people in Memphis together. And I remember one of the speakers, a Black leader, said, your maid may tell you that she doesn't have any feeling for Martin Luther King and the whole movement. But you should understand that she's sending in her quarter or her $50 every month to the SCLC. It was a powerful moment because you had both the oppressed and the powerless saying, I'm fine this way. And meanwhile, underneath, casting their lot with the movement to better their lives. Clear, but it made me think of it in the sense that following Moses was taking that kind of risk.
You know, the saying, God helps those who help themselves. So maybe that's what this is saying.
Well, that's what I think the rabbis, in the case of either one, the blood or the question of not changing their names, this, that, and the other, the rabbis wanted to make them deserving of redemption. They wanted to find ways to say, these people deserve redemption, just as there are people who said, with regard to the Holocaust, which was brought up much earlier, who said the Jews of Germany had become too assimilated and that was their punishment. A horrible thing to say. It's a horrible thing to say. There was a guy who used to hang out near the Western Wall in Jerusalem years ago, and who would mutter all they should all go back to Germany. But he was definitely of the opinion that the German Jews had brought this on themselves. Somebody's on the phone, on the Zoom. I hear. Now let's see where I am. I am where my screen goes off. Yesterday, I tried to figure out how to lengthen that. Okay. Uprooting the people who have the land. Can we go to the next slide, please? Can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. It's almost impossible. All we really need there
I can't even read. I can read
versus,
maybe on this.
there's my alarm. It seems shalom. Verses 7, 8, and 9.
And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their slave drivers, for I know their plans. I have besieged to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, that's another ites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression that the Egyptians are oppressing them.
So thank you. So we got all of the piece. Again, I've heard them, I see them, I feel their pains, etc. And the additional dimension, which we don't have time to do a lot with, but so we do have some, because I set the alarm for 10 minutes early. But we do have the additional, I'm taking them to a land flowing with milk and honey that presently is the place of, and go on. Does anybody ever deal with that question of the promised land? It's not empty. It's not, as Herzl is reputed to have said, a land without a people for a people without a land, sort of ignoring the Arabs.
It was very sparsely populated. I mean, it's.
Well, there's sure
the
a bunch
land
of-
was desert. It was not like it is nowadays.
Oh, I don't think you can,
Well,
I don't think you can say that.
one of the tricks of the Palestinian refugee situation is that, all other wars where people have been, declared refugees, once they have had one generation in a new spot, they're no longer
Right.
counted as refugees. However, we discovered that in Gaza and the West Bank, the children and the children's children of the original refugees are added to the refugee population. And that one.
And that's official from Winron, and yes, I once thought of, I still thought of writing something for somewhere that says, my children are refugees. Because their great grandparents fled Europe, in the midst of World War II. Yeah. But that doesn't answer the question about God saying, and I will bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey, and that belong, that the place of these people. What do you think, Russell?
You know, I really have trouble with this because, going back to something in American history, one of the worst things in American history was the Trail of Tears, when we sent all the Indian tribes east of the Mississippi River out to Oklahoma. But to our credit, as bad as that was, we didn't kill them. Some of them died along the way.
Killed a lot of them.
A lot of them were killed as a result of what we did, but we didn't go out there and shoot at them.
They were deliberately given blankets.
Right.
In the middle of winter.
And, but these people, we're actually being given a license to kill these folks. And I have great difficulty with this. Because this is they're just go wipe out these people and move in.
Or drive them out, in some cases wipe them out.
So, like I said, as bad as the Trail of Tears was, this would have been even worse. I just, I really can't resolve it.
What's the lesson, what lessons do we get from this as we look at our most sacred texts? And we find something that deserves us the way Russell just eloquently said. I just can't, I don't know if he said can't deal with it or can't accept it. What do we learn from it?
He was the last words in verse 7. Does God feel our pain?
God feeling our pain. I'm thinking about the question of the land, the promised land.
I think, and I think this repeats over and over again. The excuse is always, well, God wanted it. It's not like we're evil and we're gonna wipe out these people and take their land. God wants us to wipe out these people and take out the land. And why is it any more valid for us than for anyone else?
And you
A lot
have
of
the
people make
Crusades, you have all kinds of through history, you know, God wants this.
Oh, yes.
It's also how kingdoms were built. And throughout history, and I'm not making excuses, I'm just saying, we are shocked by this because we don't do this. This is how kingdoms were built and you just took over another country.
Yeah, we don't do it unless you count Texas.
I'm saying in 2024, none
Yeah,
of this.
we don't do
get
it
done,
now.
Okay, it's hard for us with our
The
sensibilities now.
Germans in World War II, I believe, some research on their belt buckle said, God is great, or literally on their belt.
On their, I think it was World War I, which said, Gott mit uns, God is with us. Yeah, something similar, God is with us. I think if we leave God out of it, then we come to your point that this has been, that like it or not, the nature of history. The fact that it repels us, well, first of all, I want to take God out of it, because I think one of the lessons we get is take the Bible seriously, but don't ever take it literally. If you take the Bible literally, all kinds of bad things come, starting with the man in Chattanooga who pleads not guilty of killing his son because he only did what Abraham was called. When pushed, well, I can give you an example of why.
The thing that I have trouble with is there must have been some righteous Egyptians there, but the righteous Egyptians suffered the plague just like the rest of the people. And the Pharaoh was the government, but he wasn't all the people. So why did all the people suffer the plagues as well?
What lesson do we get from that? The lesson we get from that is just short circuit. The lesson we get from that is innate in war between nations, which is innocent people die. What we now call collateral damage or something. Innocent people die. It's fascinating that God is talked out of Sodom and Gomorrah, or almost talked out of it, on the basis of you can't kill the righteous, because the fact is that human history is filled with the righteous dying as a result of what might otherwise be a just war. But it's, let me say war is the failure of diplomacy. And so one of the lessons we get from this, I think, is we've come far enough to be repelled by the idea of taking other people's land by force and blaming or crediting it to God. At the same time, we recognize that this is how nations have traditionally behaved. And I don't know the answer in the current, the present world. Should there be a two-state solution? Is Israel a colonial power that isn't supposed to be there? To those of you who don't know, that means it shouldn't come true than what I just said. All kinds of nuances which are very hard to deal with in the situation. Afterwards, you look back in history, you say, my God, Saul was deprived of the throne of being king of Judea or Judah. Why was he deprived of it, Judah and Israel? Why? Because he let one person live of a group that God said kill.
That's right. That's right.
So we come face to face, a lot easier to judge history than it is to make the decisions in our own time. Last one, I think, Steve.
Well, we say that, we have trouble with certain passages of the Torah. I see the Torah as a history of human experience.
Yeah.
And if you have human experience, you're gonna have the same problems over and over again.
Right.
And, you may say, well, why did God let this happen? Why did God let that happen? I don't know if there's an answer to that, it's just, we you know, we might be asking in years from now, if someone said a few minutes ago about why God, let innocent people be killed. What's going on in Palestine now? What's going on in Gaza now? Many innocent people are being killed in the name of, I don't want to get into it too much, I'm not sure what, but many are being killed.
Now the question is alternatives. Are there alternatives?
Rabbi, question, is the Torah our view of God or God's view of us?
Oh, good question. I think no question, it's our view of God over a period of time. We have to close, so I want to suggest one of the lessons we get out of this is because the 400 years and then the groaning, and I've heard the groaning, I've seen the pain, is empathy and compassion in the moment. We really can't understand why anybody has to suffer for 400 years before they're relieved of.
Okay, can I answer your original question of why did we have to be slaves? Well, there's slavery all over the world, and there has been, there was then, and there still is now. And this is kind of drawing the target around the arrow, but later on in the Torah, it's going to talk about Hebrews having slaves.
Sure.
And how we treated, we were slaves once, so this is how you treat your slaves. And how could we lecture or put in our Torah about how to treat slaves? Have we not once been slaves ourselves?
No, it's so good. It's so good, but I teach you to be good that we've been on both sides of it. But that imposes an enormous, taking it away from our having slaves, it imposes an enormous responsibility on those who have been slaves to understand and address the problem of contemporary slaves.
Like taking over somebody else's land. It's a universal phenomenon, and so is slavery. You took over their land and you made their people your slaves.
Can I just say this, like what Terry said, coming back to what Terry said, you can't look at history like with our sensibilities today, how we feel today, oh, that's wrong, oh, we can't invade somebody else's life. That's not the way history is. History is the way people felt then, and we can't look at it and try to explain it or rationalize it by how we feel now.
Or it's the way people recorded it to make it seem okay.
Yeah, right.
Even in their own eyes.
Right.
And we can't get out the big eraser and erase it.
And
No,
it's
we can't.
why they said Noah was a righteous person in his time.
Right.
Let me suggest for those who are pursuing this particular path of things happen in the world by the nature of how human beings operate. Try and see the last 10 minutes of Bill Maher, strange as it sounds, of Bill Maher, HBO Max from December 15th, when he does a kind of tour de force of a statement about the whole Israel-Gaza thing, and he has a particular, with graphics, a particular approach to the notion of how land has changed ownership over the centuries and what the people did after their land, they lost pieces of their land. He really, in his typical way, he addresses it. I don't want to say it's not cynically, it's with his usual acid kind of thing, but with real facts. And his ultimate message is the Palestinians have got to come to terms with the fact that Israel isn't going to disappear. And one of the things that happens is again and again and again, something is done by some Palestinian group, which is in essence a statement, we're really going to get rid of Israel. It's not going to happen. Then many things flow from that we wish didn't happen. But sometimes they're going to happen because because they are. That's not a very big answer. So anyway, we become slaves. I want to go back to the opening today that we borrowed from Rabbi Michael Danziger, which was, even at the time when we have loss, when Jacob and Joseph die, even when we know we're going to be enslaved, the ultimate Jewish approach is hope. Because what slavery also sets up is the redemption, the prototypical model of Jewish belief in there's always hope. Culminating in the Red Sea and eventually Sinai and eventually the Promised Land. Some terrible stumbling blocks along the way, but there's always hope, and that's really what the beginning of Exodus reminds us of, because we know the end of the story. And now we join in the Kaddish for those, and we add in the Kaddish, I think we could add those who died by violence in the Middle East, who were the innocents. Will stand if you choose, sit if you choose, and we join together. Anybody have any names that you would like us to think of?
Yeah.
My cousin who passed this week, Matthew Curley.
Yeah, Don and I have a double yard sign
Yeah,
this
Sharon.
week. Our mother, Joan Toplett Strauss, and our sister, a lot of people in here remember, Sharon Beth Strauss.
Doris Shipp, friend who passed yesterday.
Rebecca Fox's mother.
Yes,
Yes.
who was for 8 years part and parcel of this temple. as an
Oh, really?
employee.
Yeah.
Right, and Rosanna has always been part of the family, as is Rebecca.
Ah.
We join together, Yid Gadol.
No, Yid Kadash.
Shemay Rabba, Be'alma, Debraki Rishay, May Rabba, Barak, Maya, Maya, Yitbarak, Ishtabak, Barak, say, Yitadar, Yitalay, Yitalal, Shemay, Kudashah, Rikud, Tushmakata, Lekimata, Diamond, Real Malvin, Real
May God bring peace, and may we bring peace wherever it's missing, which is too many places for too many people. Everybody have a good Shabbos, and AJ, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi, for being here.
Now I have one question.
Rabbi, Joshua back to the Israelites left Egypt, were all the males were all circumcised. They thing, and Joshua, God, Joshua hadn't done this, and they did it. And the place they did it was Gilgal.
I have a funny relationship with Joshua. Because